My name is Joe Cernik. I'm a member of the faculty here at Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri, and I'd like to welcome you to Insight. Now, Insight is a show where we normally discuss books on politics, domestically and internationally, sometimes historical books that provide some insight into the present, some sort of broader trend analysis books. I think that's maybe where this book today will fit in. It's written by a man named Whitney Phillips, and the book is titled "This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things: Mapping the Relationship Between Online Trolling and Mainstream Culture." Now, joining me on the show today are two Lindenwood University students. To my immediate right is Marina Vela, and to Marina's right is Madison Liddle. And I wanted to read an opening quote from the book, and then we'll get into a discussion about it. So the author writes, "Regardless of how aberrant it may appear, trolling makes a great deal of sense within the context of contemporary American media. Trolls make expert use of the creative tools provided by the internet. Their attitudes toward and use of social media is often in direct alignment with the interests of platform marketeers, CEOs, and corporate headquarters. They harness the contours of the historical and political landscape and the corporate media systems therein. In a lot of ways, trolls do everything right." Now, first I should just explain trolling, since, again, one of the things we do with books is you're trying to sort of say, hey, I don't know a lot about an area, and maybe I should know something about it. And essentially that was how I found this book. So trolling means that you're going to usually post something online, and it would be provocative or offensive or creative or funny, which I guess the concern I have is that range of provocative, offensive, creative, or funny. So I can understand the provocative, I can understand the creative, I can understand the funny, but there are examples in the book that are sort of disgusting and offensive. When you're trying to troll about dead children, for example, and then how it was used. And so I guess I'm wondering, at some point, it almost sort of allows people to say, hey, we trolled, even though we did something like that, to be offensive towards a child who killed themselves, and call it trolling. And I'm trying to figure out if at some point maybe there shouldn't be some distinctions in that you're not going to use that word trolling related to something like that.
Well, one thing that I realized when reading this book is this thin line between respect and disrespect, between trolling, because some of the times can provide a lot of benefits to the industries, but can hurt really the feelings and personal emotions of people. So what you said, this distinction between being creative but being provocative, so it's like a broad concept for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's too broad. A lot of times it leads people in the name of humor to do things that are going to be offensive to other people, and they know it's going to be offensive. That's the intent. There's intent there that if it was done in person, it would be considered bullying, I mean, in a lot of ways. So I definitely think that that category is way too broad, but like you said, it can offer some benefits, and that is discussed in the book.
Yeah, and again, I mean, there were sections in the book where the author was trying to, I think, talk with psychotherapists and trying to get some insight. What are the people like that do this? And some of them are calling them dysfunctional, and that they have a bad relationship with how they get along with people. And so you're thinking, okay, well, I assume that isn't everybody that's trolling in some funny or creative way, but wondering how does that apply to somebody that's trying to take advantage of a grieving family and suddenly see that as their opportunity to do something on the internet about it. So I'm trying to think, okay, I can, and then new terms, I think this is normal. I mean, trolling, I assume, has not been a word around a lot over many years yet. So you're trying to figure out, how do I understand it? And the book tries to go into some of its impact.
Yeah, and the fact that it's almost always anonymous, and people who does they like they are or gamers or hackers or people related with the technology world. So that makes more antisocial, and they don't have like this feeling or emotional side.
Right. I think that they think because they can post anonymously, there's no consequences to their actions. They never face those repercussions themselves. So what harm does it really do? And in fact, it does do a lot of harm in a lot of cases.
Yeah, there was a section in the book where I think somebody was trying to develop a program to track down who the trolls were by name, but they couldn't seem to do it, and so it was very difficult. So as a result, you almost encourage, if people knew that and it was a failure, it's almost like encouraging more anonymous quotes that range again all over the place.
Yeah, and the thing, they create like a society between them, so they help each other and they know like who they are, and they pass information through blogs so they can relay in others and help each other out.
Yep.
Yeah, the one I found sort of creative but sort of disgusting was they talked about this thing called Gen Chem, where apparently somebody, I guess, goes online and says, well, there was this thing that African children do, and I guess they didn't specify where in Africa, they just used the term African children. So you urinate into a plastic jar or bottle and you let it ferment and then you inhale it. And so then the I guess the comment online was, okay, now this is spread to American children in schools, and so then you get the emphasis, I think, is important, a local Fox News affiliate, because through the book she's going to particularly discuss Fox News. And so as a result, then Fox News local picked it up as a story because, well, this sounded sensational. It was the sort of thing that was going to grab your TV audience, so we're going to run with it. And so subsequently, there was some reference that a police department in Florida picks it up and is actually trying to look into it, and you subsequently find out none of this stuff is real.
Yeah, well, I think where the children first tried because they were curious about it, and they just want to know, like, okay, what's going to happen? And this is like out of the hands of the parents, because the children are the ones that really are on internet looking to this stuff that someone made up, and they just want to try it because they truly believe it. And the parents were like super shocked, like, how my children is doing this, and at the end, it's not even true.
Right, and I think a lot of the times the trolls, like you said, they want to stir up trouble, and so yeah, they're going to post things saying that it's from one source when it's really not, and trying to stir up that whole issue. And like you said, it spread from news channel to news channel, and police departments now looking into it, and it was just a spiral.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the things she's trying to look at in the book, how you're saying here's this trolling, and you may create absolutely something that's fantasy, fiction, has no relevance to real, but then suddenly can look real because you're in this competitive media environment where local TV stations, because they're in a competitiveness, they don't have time to actually research and evaluate whether or not something is real, but man, it sure fits the idea of this is sensational, so we need this on local TV, and then suddenly you're throwing it up there without looking at, well, where did it come from? Where did the information come from?
Yeah, one thing they do is they control the popularity of the news or of the troll. So they control the circle of the news, trying to be more popular, this kind of news, to make a sound through media instead of other real news.
Right, and I think it's important to state that she picked on Fox News a lot during this, but every news channel is guilty of this to some degree, of falling into that trap. And secondly, I think it's important to realize that they are traps. They're things that are put out there in a facade that are supposed to look real, and a lot of times they do look real until you look further into it and realize that your sources are really not.
Yeah, I think the reason she picked on Fox, and because, for example, she has even a whole chapter just on Fox News, was the feeling that they wanted to be more sensationalized than other stations, so that once they came along, then they started to significantly increase their viewership. So other stations, in order to be competitive, had to sort of copy them, so that they pulled along other, particularly cable news shows. And I think that's the point she was trying to make there.
I agree. I think she was alluding to that a lot, and the fact that she thinks that Fox started that trend, and it's probably true. I haven't looked enough into that whole situation to know whether or not I believe that's accurate or not, but I think that's definitely what she's trying to make the point of.
Yeah, I think like the media want to be like providing the last thing to the viewers or to the readers. So try to be trendy and fashion, and if this is the thing that is going on now, I'm going to explain it, I'm going to expose it.
Her quote on this is, "The troll space is disorienting both in its size and in the rate at which new content is introduced, adopted, and subsequently repurposed by untold thousands of anonymous participants. The more research I conducted, the bigger and weirder the space seemed to get. Initially, it felt as if I would never know enough to make a coherent argument, let alone write a book on the subject." And so it involved for her, and I guess she's still trying to completely grasp what she's looking at.
Well, I think always in technology and media, there's a lot of dead ends. So they are trying to look for who are the blame and who is guilty to doing that, but they don't end with a final solution of that.
Like you said, it's all anonymous. I mean, very rarely will they put their name out there because they don't want to be found, and so why would they put their name on it? And so that does make it difficult to fully understand what we're dealing with because, like you said, the category is so broad for what it contains. I mean, between humor and offensive, there are people in that spectrum who are willing to do a lot of things that a lot of people would consider funny or a lot of things people would consider offensive. And so trying to diagnose the whole category of itself is pretty impossible at this time.
And I think, and again, why she's studying this is that here's something and how it begins, and you're trying to then understand that she's saying it's going to end up in the mainstream media. In her case, mainstream media means mainly cable news television. She's not really looking at newspapers. And so as a result, that this mainstream media on cable news is very competitive. So as a result, they're looking for sensationalized stories. And she's trying to understand, well, this is where some of them come from. And so there was a situation, she refers to it, that when Obama was running for president, him and his wife did this fist bump. And so somewhere in a troll thing, somebody said, oh, that's an example of terrorists, and that's how they communicate with each other. Well, Fox News National picked up on it, treated it like it was a real news story. And so now, are they secretly terrorists who are communicating with other terrorists? And then you're sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute, where did you get this sort of piece of substance from? Well, you got it from somebody who invented it as a troll on the internet. Well, that's, I guess, sort of cute, you can say. It's creative. And a troll then is going to sort of fist bump themselves and say, look at that, my invention made it to national news and became sort of a brief topic of conversation.
Yeah, well, I think it's something to worry about because there's a lot of trolls, memes, and fake news around now. So you cannot tell like if what you are reading is true or is not, and it's like the job of the media and news television and everything to like being precise and try to know like what is true and what is not, so you can provide your readers like the real truth. But there's a lot of misinformation around there and people just believe it.
Right, and I think it's like you said, it's a competition. I mean, they've created this society, this community within themselves, and it's like who can make the bigger splash, who can get their news who can get their fake news on the bigger station, who can get theirs in the media longer. Like it's a competition for them, and a lot of times they win nowadays.
There's a problem again of defining trolling in an incredibly broad way, because she says some trolling is incredibly aggressive and meets the legal threshold for harassment. Well, again, why call that trolling? why not try to, and I was wondering why she didn't. Somewhere in the book, I was sort of waiting for her to think, okay, you're the one that's developed this whole argument. Shouldn't you be sort of saying, okay, now towards the end of the book, what I want to do is sort of say, I'm going to call this trolling, but I'm not going to call this and this trolling. But she still casts that wide umbrella.
Yeah, there's a lack of categories and like how to divide those trollings, because some of them can be forever, like they stay there for years, or some of them can be spontaneous, like for a moment. And as you said, someone can be like say defined as harassment, and others like just a joke, like making fun of someone's faces, and that's it.
Right.
So I think these categories have to be set in order to all understand better the concept.
Right, and I think a lot of times you can argue that it's harassment because it's not harassment because it's anonymous. I mean, they can't put a name to a face, they can't put a name to a screen name. So if they start calling it harassment, then they're at fault for not being able to figure out who it is and causing that harm. So they call it trolling to kind of alleviate that blame a little bit.
But again, you know, here she is, and she's distinguishing. She's saying a significant percentage of this is directed at people of color, especially African Americans, women, and gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. So once again, there's these things about trolling. You can say that's cute and creative and funny, that story of the African children that was completely myth. But then she, through the book, is sort of pointing out that, okay, well, here's where it's not, and you're sort of seeing a lot of her examples of thinking, okay, so why are we using this term troll for things that don't appear to be?
Yep, and a lot of times I think that they hit on hot button topics. I mean, what are the ones that are in the media, even in the legitimate media? Gay, lesbian, inter relations, African Americans, women rights. Like, they're going to use things that people are already talking about. And so, yeah, I think we fuel the fire a little bit.
Yeah, they pick in the minorities because it's easier for them to just talk about something that everybody knows is controversial at some point right now, instead of just being regular and plain and talk about one topic that everybody just agree on.
She brought up there was a student who lost his iPod, and apparently they were trying to say that this was the reason why he shot himself. And so then somehow this made it onto the internet, and then people started going after his parents and trying to make a lot of ridicule of the parents who were in a state of mourning. And so she's saying, well, this was trolling. And I'm going, well, I don't know whether, again, I was thinking, why couldn't she uses the term, these people are involved in emotional disassociation. Okay, you're being critical of them, but then you're still calling it trolling.
Yeah, she hesitates the entire book to make any sort of definitive statement about whether or not it's harassing or not, and we've already kind of discussed that a little bit, but she never fully places the blame on them. She says that it's irritating or that it's, you know, probably disrespectful, but she never fully says, like, this is wrong. Like, there is definitely some sort of legal aspect of this that's being broken.
Yeah, they also create like a side about that example about the dead child, wherever, and I think there is when you cross the line, like being in a personal and private topics, and also being like hurting people, right, instead of trying to be a joke or just okay, trying to be intentional or creative. It's more like in the bad side of the concept.
Yeah, she referred to 3 Canadian psychologists back in 2014 who tried to study the personalities of people that were trolling to see if they can make some distinction, and they couldn't do it. But then an article said internet trolls really are horrible people, narcissistic, Machiavellian, psychopathic, and sadistic. It was like you're sitting there and thinking, okay, so, but then she's sort of, again, using that broad range. And so, again, that to me was, I guess, what I was trying to look for her at some point to begin to say, okay, I'm going to distinguish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at some point they say, like, it's just an entertainment for them, but whenever they are like doing this as that hard, trying that hard to be in the news or hurting people or something like that, I think it's more than entertainment. They have a purpose and they are gonna go for it.
Right.
To being like, I don't know, trend, to be trendy topic, to be in the media, to try to be like earning.
Right, and I think the fact that we've designated this word trolling to this whole topic has kind of made it okay in a sense. Like, oh, it's not harassment. It's something that just people just do. It's just trolling, and I think that kind of downplays the amount of hurt that it can do. And like you said, they pick on people who are mourning or minorities and stuff like that. And if people did that in person, that wouldn't be considered trolling. And I think that's where we have to create the barrier of what we're going to consider acceptable in society.
Her criticism of Fox News actually came down to, she was saying one of the things Fox used as its approach to introducing a story was to say, quote, some people say. And by simply saying some people say, it allows you this incredible latitude to introduce a whole series of stories of questionable substance or questionable origin. And then that's how in her chapter that she calls The House That Fox Built, how she then goes on. And yes, it does spread to other channels, but it's sort of like what other channels saw was Fox was successful, so you're beginning to imitate what Fox did.
I think when you say like some people say, like Fox said, is something like, well, we care about who they are, but this is the only information like they are not providing us, because we know like they harm people and what they are doing is not right, but we don't know, so we cannot blame anyone for that.
Right, and I think what she's calling for in a lot of ways is for more vetted sources on news channels, and in a lot of ways she's criticizing the fact that they are just trying to be trendy at this point, and they're not trying to make legitimate news claims. And I think that not just Fox, but you can look at a lot of other news stations and see the same kind of thing. Like you said, it's a wildfire, and once one station gets the edge on another one, they're gonna duke it out, and we see that in a lot of different ways. But yeah, I think it's important that we realize that we kind of fuel this fire by being pulled in by these trendy stories that we all know aren't true.
It was interesting, even though you're sort of seeing the difficulty of trying to identify who trolls are, at points in the book, she's sort of saying we're sort of classifying as mainly male, mainly white, and mainly upper economic class, which was interesting because then I was trying to figure out, okay, where did that come from? And I couldn't quite. I think some of it had to do when she created her own site, but it wouldn't identify herself, but tried to get people to communicate with her. And my feeling was she probably mainly drew that conclusion from these people communicating with her, but not identifying. She didn't want to be identified who she was.
Right.
Yeah, I think it should be hard for her to really know like who the trolls were or like the identity, but makes sense when you identify the trolls as a white men, because it's easier for them to pick in minorities or people who is worse than them in a situation or socially, to being like people in minority, like picking in minorities as well.
Right, I think we do have to be careful, and she makes a statement as well that you have to be a little bit careful about trusting that information because, like she said a lot of times in the book, she's not an expert on this topic yet, and she hasn't fully grasped this whole idea. And like the reviews of her book even say that this is a really trendy whole concept. It's a new genre that's being built. People haven't really written books or topics about this kind of thing yet, and so she's still kind of easing her way into it. And so it's hard to make definitive statements about what we're really dealing with as far as who these people are, because we're just getting into the scene.
Right, and that's not a bad point to bring up. I mean, that is because you're trying to say we're looking at something, I'm still trying to understand it. And she is. She's trying to say, well, the reason I'm looking at it is because what we do know is some of it spills over into mainstream, mainly cable news is where it is. And so as a result, it receives an audience. And so she, for example, has a quote, put another way, and with Fox News leading the charge, trolls were given a framework upon which to build their public face. They happily set up camp thanks to an increasingly incensed mainstream media, were furnished with a constant supply of food. And so then she refers to when Bill O'Reilly had his show on, the O'Reilly Factor, that she's saying how O'Reilly essentially, even though he wanted to sort of be incredibly critical of trolling, all he was doing was encouraging them, because then he'd sort of constantly do that.
Right, he gave them a platform to stand on in the mainstream media, and then it wasn't even at that point as like news, it was at that point entertainment, and so giving them that platform of like, yeah, it's funny and we're going to encourage this, kind of made it so that it was okay, and obviously it's not.
And the fact that people is reading them and people is like commenting and retweeting or reposting, that makes them like increase as a community, like build a community, and also like earn a name, make a sound through the social media.
Yep.
The Obama birth certificate issue, and then she addresses that as an example that this was Fox News essentially coming up with a lot of its own approaches without the benefit of trolling, and that she's trying to show how they sort of were imitating trolls, sort of inventing information, and that no matter what he did to try to dispel the notion that, hey, I am an American citizen, it didn't matter. Fox was going to find language they could use to constantly say something. We only have a moment left. What do you think of this book?
I really like the book, but I think you should know a little bit of the topic before reading it, because I was some terms were like very difficult for me. But I think it's like a very trendy and a reality in the world we live today. So I really recommend the book.
Yeah, I recommend it to people who are our age, people who are a little bit older, who deal with the media and on social media, because it's important to realize that we deal with these people every day and we don't even realize it. And so I thought the book was really good. I think it's a little bit of a tougher read, but if you sit down, you give yourself ample time, you're not going to have any problem getting through it.
Yeah, when I picked up the book, I got lost with terms that I was unfamiliar with, or sites online that I was completely unfamiliar with, so I had to sort of go slower to try to begin to say, okay, well, I got to make sure I'm clearly understanding what it is I'm reading. I mean, I'd heard of the term troll, but knew next to nothing about it. And I guess my main criticism is I would have liked to have seen her break it down, say, okay, now that I've begun the process of looking at this, I'm assuming she's going to do more writing, she would begin to say, all right, I'm going to classify this as trolling, but not this. Because she says, well, they crossed the line into harassment, or they did something that was very despicable, and so why not distinguish and begin the process of doing that? But I didn't see that part in the book. So an interesting book about topics I guess none of us knew a great deal about. Sure. So thank you for joining us today.